Good afternoon, everyone. This is Eric Preuss with the Iowa Department of Public Health, and welcome you to webinar number 3 in a series of 6, part of the IDPH Integrated Provider Network Problem Gambling Treatment Webinar Series. And glad to have Jerry Bauerkemper and Jessica Hartz, and a bit of myself as well today with this, as we delve more into that Problem Gambling Treatment 101, Part 2, looking at the Gambling Treatment Toolkit. Which is a continuation of what many of you heard yesterday, starting with Jerry, and you'll get to hear a few other things. We are recording this session as we have in the past, and we'll get those posted. For those, most of you have registered, and on the slide that I'm showing now shows you that we've got 3 more scheduled after this, the next one on Wednesday, February 27th. And then Thursday, March 7th, and then Wednesday, March 30th will be the final in the 6-part series. I know we'd have had a lot of questions about CEUs on the first couple of webinars. Please give us 30 days. For those of you who have attended the first 2, we have the information downloaded from the site and have that available, and we'll start working on getting those CEUs, but just give us 30 days for those CEUs. We will do a poll at the end to confirm attendance throughout the session today, and by participating in that poll, that'll let us know who is interested in getting those CEUs, and we'll go over other options to notify that as well. So just again, for some of you who might be here on the first time and new to the Zoom interface, just letting you know that you have, I should get my pointer going here, hold on a second. Come on. So we have the mute button here that we ask you to make sure that you mute yourself by using this little, clicking on this mute icon. I've muted most everyone here, but as new people come in, I may have to do that as well. If you've joined us by phone, please make sure you *6 to mute yourself and then *6 to unmute yourself. We've talked about the use of the chat feature here, which will allow you to ask questions and provide other additional information or comment and feedback. We'll be monitoring as that we go through. And some people are saying it's difficult for them to hear me. I apologize because I'm using my headset here rather than, or I'm using a different setup today. So hopefully that's a little bit better for folks. So thank you for that comment. And then also, if you've joined by phone, to make sure that you're using your participant ID. And then as well, for the CEUs, as I mentioned, you were registered at the beginning of the webinar, and we'll use that information for CEUs in conjunction with the poll at the end to confirm attendance at the end. And then I will get the handouts out here shortly to everyone via the chat window as we get started here. So these are the things that we're going to cover today. So what I wanted to do right now, because people are asking for them, is to get the files out. So just give me a second to get that set up for everyone. Apologize for the delay. Get that momentarily here. Make sure I'm giving you the right ones here. I've attached one document for you, and now I will attach the second. All right, so you'll have the gambling pathways and the slides from today. So those are now posted in the chat for you guys to see this. And a question that had come out, and I think Leslie or someone else had asked this question on previous ones. If there are staff members that are unable to attend the webinar today and they watch the recording, will they be able to still get CEUs? I do not know the answer to that question. That would be something that would have to talk with the Iowa Board of Certification on, as to whether they would allow the permission of those CEUs. I can do some follow-up with Lori as well. But my guess is that it is a CEU approved. But since they're not watching it live, I'm not sure how that process would work. So we'll delve in that. And thanks for Leslie for the question. But the first place I would go to is the Iowa Board of Certification to ask that question. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on. The slides are out there for everyone. So what we're going to discuss in part 2 is really looking at tools in the problem gambling toolkit. We're going to have, again, Jerry Bauerkamper talking on some of these subjects, as well as Jessica Hartz. But what we'll cover today is what do I need to know about special populations, an overview of screening and brief intervention tools that are available. We'll hear from Jessica talking somewhat about her experience using the Gambling Pathways Questionnaire, which I think we will find is a very valuable tool to assist you, especially if you are new to the field. In assisting and helping individuals who are struggling with their gambling, help find, by way of this questionnaire, a better pathway to their own recovery based on the pathway that they took to get into the gambling. So hopefully I said that all right, Jessica. And then medication-assisted treatment, Jerry will talk a little bit about that, and as well as working with family members. And at the end, as time allows, we'll talk a little bit about voluntary self-exclusion. Some of our people are saying, are the slides not posted? Okay. Okay, I see what happened. My apologies. Only one person got to see them. I will go and repost them real quickly. Thank you for following up on that. I will, all right. And so I just put the Gambling Pathways Questionnaire out there for everyone, and here come the slides. Okay, they should all be out there for everyone. Thank you, Marie, for pointing that out to me. I just sent them to one person instead of everybody. Okay, so Jerry, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and let you go.
Okay, good afternoon from snowy Midwest. We left off yesterday and we were talking about special populations, and although there hasn't been a lot of research done on prevalence in populations recently, because we have a pretty good idea of the prevalence of the populations. And as we go through this, you'll see that some of these studies are old, but they've been replicated several times and they have similar results. So we talk about the fact that we have African Americans. About 11.5% of the population has some sort of problem or disordered gambling issue. 7.7% of Hispanics. You can see as we go down here, the Asian Americans, Native Americans, and one that I highlighted here was some research done in 2003 where 60% of Southeast Asians surveyed were classified as having problems as a result of their gambling. That's an extremely large number, but research has proven that Asians are somewhat susceptible to this, and I've done some training out in Southeast Asia because they are very fearful of this research and the fact that they have such a high propensity for problem gambling. Next. I want to talk about young adults and adolescents and older adults and women, but one of the things that was a wives' tale back before we started doing research was that older adults were more susceptible to having gambling problems. And the truth of the matter is research suggests that adolescents and young adults are more susceptible to having gambling problems than older adults. Older adults are easier to spot, and they have more consequences because they're not bailed out by their families. Young adults prefer action games, and they generally show up into counseling sessions as a result of behavioral or conduct problems. They also find their way into what happens is that they will go off to college, and all of a sudden their college tuition isn't paid, or they don't have the money because they've gambled it, and then they have to tell their parents, things like that. So you're going to find that when you see the young adults, the 21 on up to 30, what you're going to find is that they prefer action games, and they come in as a result of some sort of behavioral issues and or financial issues. Next. Older adults, they're lower risk than young adults, but they are more vulnerable. And when we say that is because they have a tendency to spend more time, and they have limited income, and so they run through their income and their savings and their 401s, their retirements very quickly, and they end up on the doorstep of problem gambling, destitute, and somewhat depressed. They also prefer more passive games, and they gamble for relaxation, boredom, passing time, and getting away. There are lots of senior centers and places that will pick them up and take them to casinos and bingo and places like that. And they use that as a social event, but sometimes they get themselves into trouble as a result of that. And the last part of the slide, you can see that they back in 1975, only 35% of the population, older adults 65 and older, had gambled. And in 1998, 80% of those had gambled. And that number has gone up and has settled somewhere around 90% at this point, which means that the vast majority of older adults have gambled, and a somewhat regular percentage gamble regularly. In fact, one of the jokes that we have around the casinos when I do trainings is that in the daytime, the primary color of the casinos is gray, simply because most of the gray hairs are there. And being 62 myself, I understand what gray hair looks like, feels like, and acts like, and I understand what they mean by the gray in the casinos. Next. Back to adolescents. Adolescents are 4 to 8% probable for disordered gambling or gambling issues. And this is much higher than the adult population, and much higher than the probable or problems that adults have. Adolescents are very susceptible to gambling issues because it is risk-taking, and adolescents are very risk takers. For those of you that are just coming out of adolescence, you understand that, and for those of us that have been through adolescence, both us and with our children, we understand what risk-taking is and some of the goofy things we did in risking in our adolescence. And adolescence, the rite of passage has moved from alcohol to both alcohol and gambling. In fact, a lot of they used to do a lot of bar crawls, and they do bar crawls still, but they also have times when they're going to the casinos, because the casinos are a rite of passage at their age too. Next. So let's profile adolescents. Predominantly male. Mostly males get involved early on in gambling, and that early on process starts around the age of 11 or 12. They quickly preoccupy themselves with gambling, and they they have a tendency to gravitate towards things like action games like cards and sports and poker. Those kinds of things are what they're very interested in. They have a tendency to lie a great deal uh, about their gambling to people. I remember when my oldest was in high school, um, she we were driving in a car and she says, "Oh, there's the local dealer." In a car that was passing us. And I said, "Well, who's the local bookie?" And she said, "Well, I don't know." The next day she came home and said, "Well, I now know who the local bookie is." So in the schools, there are bookies, there are gamers that are wagering, and there are lots of problems that start themselves in high school, but that are bailed out by parents unknowingly by giving them resources and money. They are also very confused on whether they should stop or not stop. Do they want to stop? Do they want to stop forever, for not forever? That's a similarity with alcohol and drug usage too. When they go into treatment, they say to themselves, "Man, I'm way too young to stop this process." So next, uh, women, and we talk about we when we started this process in working with gamblers, when I started about 33 years ago, the primarily males came into treatment. Very few females came into treatment. Very few females were actively gambling. That has changed significantly in the last 35 years. Now, women are more likely to come into treatment than men, and they self-report at a 70% rate of prior seeking mental health treatment. Now, that's for those of you that have a mental health unit and a substance abuse unit and a gambling unit. You now know that 70% of the women who have a gambling problem are starting out as self-reporting as a mental health client. 26% had prior suicide attempts, and they experience a tremendous amount of abuse and isolation as a result of both their mental health issues and their gambling issues. And they are less likely to seek treatment for gambling because gambling is the answer to all their mental health issues. It helps them to get away from their problems, and so they are less likely to report that because it is their answer to their current situation. Next. So, the predisposing factors for women gamblers are history of abuse or neglect. One of the things that you're going to need to look at is abuse and neglect and trauma, because you're going to get a high percentage of people, both male and female, that are coming into treatment, but especially females that have a history of abuse or trauma. They also have deaths in their families. They have fear of their own death, loss of their own youth. And they are a lot of times raised in low-income families, which gives them somewhat of a skewed idea of the value of money. It becomes all important. And one of the things you're going to talk about in some of the future webinars is how to determine the value that they put on money and the influence it has in their gambling life and in their gambling problem. Go. Okay, other predisposing factors, empty nest syndrome. We see a lot of that. Older women, after they've raised their children, they have empty nest syndrome, and the answer to that is to go to where it's very social. It's very social at the casinos, and they have a tendency to misunderstand the value of the socialization of gambling, and it traps them as a result of them seeing that as an answer to their sadness and their emptiness syndrome. They have a lot of people who are women who are involved in gambling as well as men, but women also have a lack of leisure activities. And one of the hallmarks of the escape gambler is they have used their gambling to escape the rest of the world because of these predisposing factors. And the way that they stop gambling is to deal with these leisure activities, and so that they have enough going for them, and then the gambling naturally stops. Now, having said that, that's a long process, because it's hard to get a person who has started gambling and using it as a coping mechanism and using it as a social event and using it for all of their needs, to be treated well, et cetera, et cetera. All of those needs, to all of a sudden they are stopping that gambling, and nothing happens. They don't have anything else to lean on, and so they usually go back to gambling. So, and they also have a lot of other mental health conditions: depression, anxiety, PTSD, etc. I'll stop right there. And are there any questions before I move on? Okay, let's move on then.
Yeah, Jerry, we did have one question.
Okay.
William was asking, what type of gambling do you notice the most with adolescents, such as card games or sports?
Yes,
others? I know
sports, fantasy, esports, gaming, pitching pennies, interestingly enough, but a lot of card games early on, and a lot of fantasy and gaming. And one of my presentation that's coming up here in about, I don't know, the last presentation, which are the trends, is going to talk a lot about esports and in e-gaming, and the fact that adolescents are doing a lot of wagering on that, and a lot of time, effort, and energy into the gaming. And I was at the Luxor Casino, and they have a gaming floor just for gamers, and I'll show you some pictures of that that I took while I was there this week. But it is, adolescents are mostly male, and they're mostly gamers. Okay, I hope that answered that question. Okay, so moving on, and please understand that there's a lot to working with special populations, but we don't have time to delve into those. If you want to delve into those, then email me and ask me questions, and I'd be glad to answer them. I know Eric would be glad to answer them, and we'd be glad to come and help you to set up processes that will help you with working with the special populations. So moving on. So interestingly enough, researchers found that those players who perceived they were on a winning streak gambled more and more recklessly and lost. Welcome to the world of gambling. When you're doing well, you think that you are unstoppable, much like an adolescent, and then you begin to gamble recklessly and lose. That is the impulsiveness and the epitome of the disorder, as it's exactly how it's being stated. And so what happens here is that people have, especially action gamblers, this speaks especially to action gamblers, is the fact that when they're losing, they gamble more, and when they're winning, they gamble more. And the end result is when they gamble more, they're more likely to lose. Next. So illegal activities. Now, in the DSM-4, illegal activities was in there as one of the criteria. Now, it was taken out along with the bipolar, although they did leave the manic part of the process as a rule out. But there was a place for illegal activities, and up to 30% of all gamblers have committed illegal acts prior to seeking treatment. And as you can see at the very bottom of this, a survey of GA, which is Gamblers Anonymous, 46% had reported stealing, and 39% reported being arrested. Now, that's a little higher than the general gambler that comes in, but understand one of the questions and one of the things you're going to have to deal with is people who are writing bad checks, people who are embezzling, people who are doing tax fraud, people who are doing theft. And they'll do things that are that like theft is they go and they shoplift, and tax fraud can mean even they don't even file taxes with the IRS because they can't afford to pay for the wins they've had. And most people assume that gamblers are losers, and the reality is that most gamblers have hit pretty big jackpots in their life. They just gamble them all back, but they still get taxed on that. They get taxed both federally and on the state level, and many times they can't afford that tax because they take out the minimum and they're in the higher tax bracket. So they have embezzlement. I remember I was working at a treatment center. I was the director of a gambling treatment center, and the secretary was stealing all the money that the gambling participants would bring in for their copay. And she had her own gambling problems. She was embezzling from the gambling treatment center. So those are the kinds of things. And of course, I didn't see it, and as a person who's worked 30 years, they're very good at hiding all of these things. And so you're going to have to spend a little bit of time touching this with your questions. But once you find that they've done an illegal activity, you're going to need to refer them to a lawyer in order to because you are, in fact, responsible if you have to testify. So you don't want to get all the details of that until the lawyer tells you it's okay. That's in the legal part. So let's move on. Eric. Okay, more on crime. A 2010 study said 1 in 5 inmates is a problem or a diagnosable gambler. We did a 2006 study of probation. We found that to be at about 22%. And what that means is about, in the study that we did, 22% of the people self-admitted they had a gambling problem while on probation. Very, very few of them were asked to go to treatment or sought treatment. And one of the things that happens here is that they come in for another offense, but they're not put, in requirements. They're not required to go get a gambling evaluation, so of course they don't. But understand, if you're seeing people who are on probation, 22% of the people you see on probation will have a gambling problem. So if you're seeing people that are substance abuse or mental health probation, check for a gambling issue. Next. Okay, this is people that are in corrections. You'll see PAG problem with alcohol and gambling, about 40%. And this is another study done. People that have just gambling problems, just about 18%. Some problem and no problem. And look at the difference between that population, the population in corrections, and the population in general. You can see that the corrections population is full of people with both alcohol and gambling problems. Next. And here's an interesting thing about gamblers that is, it speaks to the brain and how the brain reacts to gambling. And gamblers enjoy a near miss almost as much as a win. And what that means is that when you go and you're at a slot machine and it says 7, 7, and then comes up a queen, to a gambler, that near miss means that almost as much, and the brain reacts just as much in the pleasure centers as if they had hit the jackpot. So that's why you see gamblers come in and say, man, the machine's getting hot. It's ready to go because of this phenomenon. And so this happens with people with gambling problems and with people who don't have gambling problems. But the people that have gambling problems, this is just an addition to their addictive process that they are already in. So they continue to gamble and gamble and gamble until all their resources are gone, because near misses are almost as much as wins. Next. Let's go on to the next part. Next one. Because the next slide talks about this brain, if you would.
Yeah. Hey, Jerry, just I want to interrupt.
Okay, you can do that one.
No, you can continue to talk. There was just, Todd made an observation, and I think it goes back to some of the things that you've been discussing, and he put a note out there about loot boxes, and I don't know whether you want to talk more about loot boxes to help people understanding what that is and how that is.
I'm going to tease him. If that's okay if I tease him, I'm going to talk about loot boxes in the last presentation that I do.
Okay.
But I can tell you that loot boxes are so controversial and lead so much to addictive gambling that that some of the gaming manufacturers are actually stopping losing loot boxes because they are taking such heat for the fact that adolescents are getting themselves into so much trouble. So, but we will talk about loot boxes in the last one.
All right. Thanks, Jerry.
Okay. So, in the amygdala, the fear response, one of the research studies that was found was that if that amygdala was damaged in any way, shape, or form, and that could be through trauma, etc., that the gamblers would it produced gambling issues as a result of this. Gamblers, that one of the things we know about gambling is that when they're in gambling, they're not in the prefrontal cortex in the decision making. They're back in the amygdala piece of that, and that amygdala piece of their brain is very primitive, and it also is the part that strikes the biggest part of their gambling illness. And so if it's damaged and the gambler is gambling, then they have a tendency to go into problem gambling rapidly as a result of this process. So next. So cognitive distortions. You're going to want to listen to gamblers when they and ask them about these kinds of questions. And I'll start with the very top one. My system of play will eventually prove to be successful. And I hear that with gamblers all the time. You know, I have a system, it works. Well, in the early stage, in the winning stage of gambling, usually they tried something and it worked, and they now see it as their system, and they constantly go back to it because it used to work. But now it doesn't work, and the reason it doesn't work is because there are no systems that work that gaming entities are allowing in the system. Now you can count cards, etc., but if you get caught at that, they ask you to leave. Those are systems that can be successful. But most people that are coming into your office and my office are going to say, I have a system and it was successful and it can be again, and usually that's just random chance. So past outcomes are good predictors of future chances. I was at the casino this last week, and they have a roulette table, and on the roulette table they have the last winning numbers that are stacked up, the last 30 or 40 winning numbers, and then over to the side of it, it says things like the hot numbers in the last 200 or 300 or 400, and those are for gamblers' cognitive distortions, because gamblers believe that hot numbers win, or my numbers do, and so they flip it back and forth, whatever fits their system. But we all know that most gambling, in fact, all gambling, is statistical, and every time you roll, every time that ball goes around the roulette table, it has an equal 1 in 38 chance of hitting that number. It does not change if it hit the number, the last one or the last 3 times. It's still 1 in 38. But gamblers, especially gamblers that have problems, see that as wrong, and that they can predict the winners. I sat and listened to people at the roulette table, and they were saying, I have this system, and 20 minutes later they're broke and they're gone because their system isn't really a system. There are people who go in and they believe they have the illusion of control or influence over the machines, and also over all types of gambling. So they take their trolls and their lucky rabbit's foot and their coins and they swipe the machines, etc., and they tap the machines a certain way, and they either look at the machines or they don't look at the machines, but they believe that they have the power to influence a slot machine or a bingo ball drop or something like that, and they cannot do that. But that's the ultimate in their illness, in that they have false beliefs in their own power over games that are random. And the initial or winning creates a belief that future outcomes will be similar. I won once when I was wearing these red socks, so every time I go to the casino, I wear my lucky red socks. And that's my recommendation is to wash your socks. Don't just keep wearing them, because it has no influence. Next. Gambling is a legitimate way to make money. There's research out there, and I didn't put it in this presentation, that especially older adults see gambling as a way for them to supplement their income. In fact, I have had several clients, older adult clients, who get to the middle of the month and they think that they're going to be a little short at the end of the month with their retirement, and then they go to the casino to try to supplement their income. Now, that also happens with younger adults also, but I find that this is very prevalent in older adults. They believe they have a personal relationship to luck. Now, that stands for itself. There's no such thing as a personal relate. One person isn't more lucky than others. There's a lot of statements around luck. Luck is preparation and attitude, but there aren't. They will say, "I'm a really lucky person. I'm just not having luck right now," or "I'm a winner, but I'm just on a losing streak." They're going to say things like that, and that's that personal belief, the personal relationship. And here's the one that really is true of most gamblers. Gambling is the only way I can make as much as I need to get out of debt. And I hear things like, if I just hit a jackpot, I don't need to come to counseling anymore because I'll be out of debt. And the last one that we have here is, I'm respected by other guys I gamble with. This is the notion that they travel in packs and they don't confront each other, and they believe that they are respected. And the reality of the situation is, the second you walk out of that gambling group, they don't remember you unless you owe them money. So next. So the state, and I think Nicholas is going to do this as part of his assessment and treatment. He's going to go through some of the gambling screening tools, but there are lots of gambling screening tools out there, some of which are better, some of which are for the mass population, some of which are for people that are coming into your office. Things like the nods are for the general public. Things like the South Oak screen is for the individual. The GA20 questions, which we're going to go through, is for the individual. The SOGS RA is for adolescents. But you see that there are lots of tests, lots of screening tools out there. And Eric, what are the ones that are required by you at this point in your license?
Oh, Jerry, we don't require that any screening. There is not a single tool that is carved out within the code for the standards that say it, just that as part of licensure, they are to do a comprehensive assessment.
Okay.
So there are providers are up to see, not only about what do they use to screen for problem gambling, but also for mental health disorders, substance use disorders, etc.
Good. So these are some options for you. Now, I know Nicholas is going to give you some more options and some ones that he used, and we're going to talk about the pathways model questionnaires. And I can't say that, well, I think you're going to find the pathways model is a good place to start, especially if you're new to this. The pathways will really give you a focused process to go through. And then you can add these other screens on. Next.
Yeah, Jerry, the only other thing that I add is that we do have the department put together in cooperation with several other states. It's called the DGSPS, which is the Disordered Gambler Expert Screen and Pre-Screen, which is on the IGTP website. If you go to the treatment site, you'll see that listed under screening tools. And maybe Jessica will talk a little bit about that, is how they've used it there pretty successfully with some of their populations.
Okay, moving on. I'm trying to get to her. This is the GA20 questions. Gamblers Anonymous can help you to get these. If the reason I have them all is because generally GA they like to keep their little books and things for people in GA. So I'm giving them to you so that you can use them if you want to. But these are great conversation starters as far as getting the gambler to talk about the areas of their gambling that are important for you to do your assessment to find out where they need to go. And so my recommendation is to have them somewhere near you, but don't ask them just like this. Did you ever lose time from work or school due to gambling? No, never did that. Has gambling ever made your life unhappy? Nope, never has. Well, isn't your spouse the reason you're here? But I'm not unhappy. So you're going to need to learn these questions and begin to ask them in ways that they can answer other than yes or no. And one of the things you want to talk about is, have they ever felt remorse after gambling? In other words, when you walked out of your gambling establishment, did you say to yourself, oh, I wish I hadn't have done that? And those are the kinds of things that, once or twice I walk out and I go, man, I should have left an hour earlier, or I should have left when I was up, or, and those are the kinds of, yes, that's a yes to that question. And after losing, did you feel the need to return? First of all, I would ask them, have you ever chased your losses? And if they know what the word chasing is, then they are further down the road than the social gambler, because most social gamblers don't know what chasing is. And that's number 7. And if you ever gambled until your last dollar was gone, that's a primary sign of a gambling issue. Most people take their $20 or their $40, and when they lose that 40, they leave. Gamblers have a tendency to use every bit of their resources that they have before they walk out. And you talk about, did they ever borrow money to finance their gambling? One of the ways you want to talk about that is, how many credit cards do you have and how many are maxed out? And did you ever gamble longer than you had planned? One of the ways that you're going to get to that is you're going to hear people say, like, man, it's not my fault. They don't have clocks in the casino. Ooh. Most people have phones and watches, or both. And so what that means is they gambled longer than they planned. And have you considered self-destruction or suicide? There was a study done maybe 20 years ago from GA, and they said that well over 80% of people in Gamblers Anonymous had thought about attempting suicide prior to coming to GA. That's a very high percentage of people. And so we talked about this yesterday, and I will hit it again. Make sure that you are very clear on whether or not they're suicidal or depressed enough to be impulsive enough to commit suicide. Next. And here's the Gam-Anon questions. Sometimes you're going to have family members that come in either before the gambler, without the gambler, or even with the gambler. And these are the questions that you should be looking to ask them. And so one of the questions is now that you're sitting in this room, how do you feel? Do you feel this person cannot be trusted with money? That's very impactful, because when you're trying to set up a budget and finances with this family, you're going to find that there's a tremendous amount of distrust amongst money in this family now that they found out that they've gambled all this money away. And as you go through the rest of these questions, it says, does the person borrow money to gamble or with to pay gambling debts? They may not know that, but when and if they find out that the gambler's mother and father-in-law has loaned them money, and he or she did not tell the spouse, there's going to be a whole lot of issues to deal with around that, simply because no wonder the spouse's family don't like Bob, because Bob's borrowed money and hadn't paid it back, and she doesn't even know it, or he doesn't even know it. And so somewhere along the line, all these friends are going to be dropping off, and they're not knowing, and the spouse isn't knowing why. Well, it's because they owe them money and they're not paying it back. So as you go through these things, find out where they are with that. And then when the gambler starts giving away who they owe, and you have to ask questions, how much do you owe your family? And not just your spouse and your kids, because they might have set up a social security number and get credit cards with their kid's name on it. How much of their in-laws and their friends do they owe? So go on. This is the pathway questionnaire. Does Jessica want to deal with this, or?
I'll hand it off to Jessica.
Okay, Jessica, it's all yours.
So Jessica, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
All right, my name is Jessica Hartz. I work at ADS, Alcohol and Drug Dependency Services in Burlington, Iowa, as a counselor, mostly with the problem gambling treatment. So this questionnaire has been really beneficial with treatment planning, which is what it was designed to do. It's a 48 question on like a 6-point scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. It was developed by Alex Blazinski and Leah Nauer, and they were trying to find a way to help clinicians find out what the underlying conditions were so that treatment planning could be better and recovery could be more likely. And so they asserted there were 3 possible pathways, which are on the slide that you see. Those definitions on there are an exact quote from one of the papers, which I have in my reference section. And I actually just used to read those to clients until I got a really good way. I developed a better memory of what they were. Prior to this screen or assessment, really what a clinician had to do, a counselor had to do, was learn about the client and try to find out what the underlying causes were, which could be difficult if the client was not very self-aware, or they might not agree with what you thought was underlying conditions. So this assessment has been very helpful in bringing those out at admissions, which is when I do the screening. The first one is behaviorally conditioned, pathway 1. This is people who develop problem gambling just really by doing it and developing a habit around it. So they tend to not have mental health conditions prior to problem gambling or physical issues that led them to escape into gambling. So this is somebody usually has a long history of recreational gambling, and then they've just increased their cognitive distortions and don't really understand the probability of winning. And so what I've found is if you have a pathway 1 person in treatment, what is most beneficial for them is just education around how gambling games work and how odds are, what the odds are, and the house advantage and the law of averages, and just sort of how casinos and other establishments can make money off of it. and then looking at their belief structures and trying to help them change that. So that was something I only started doing after I started this assessment. It never really occurred to me that that would be helpful. But for behaviorally conditioned people, they're really interested in that, and it can be helpful. Pathway 2s are emotionally vulnerable clients, so they tend to have mental health conditions prior to problem gambling. A lot of times they have traumatic experiences at some point in their life, either childhood or adults, and history of poor coping and problem-solving skills, and so they use gambling to cope. It's a coping skill for them. This type of client I actually see the least in treatment, which surprised me. But when I do see them, they're almost always cold calls from the community. They're not usually in treatment, substance abuse treatment. So a lot of times they don't have, other than emotional problems, you won't see them, and they don't normally have substance use issues, unless they were, you won't normally see them in treatment anyway. So, and then, so with the pathway 2, in treatment, usually they're a lot of times in crisis, and so they want to talk a lot about how they're feeling, which is good, because they get a lot of benefit from that in the counseling department, and just trying to help them find better coping skills, healthier coping skills. And then the pathway 3s are antisocial impulsive gamblers. When the paper was originally, when the authors originally did their paper, they thought it was a subset of pathway 2. I saw Leah Nauer in a conference last year, and she had said that they now think it's a distinct pathway. But there are similarities between some of the issues with pathway 2s that you'll see with pathway 3 people as well, which is why they thought there was a subset at the time that they published the paper. But pathway 3s have they're impulsive, they're just kind of naturally impulsive, and they like taking risks. They're most often have a comorbid addiction to something else. So majority of my pathway 3s I have only screened and gotten in treatment because they've been in substance abuse treatment. So these are the people that you normally see in treatment, in jails waiting for treatment, that normally have some sort of criminal justice history. And I can tell you that in the 2 years I've started doing the assessment, I very quickly was able to tell who was a pathway 3 in the placement screening, because they have a very distinct way of talking about gambling. They tend to they like the excitement, they like the risk taking. They usually don't want to stop, but they want to control it. And they like other things in their life for risk taking. So for them, what I found to be most helpful is to find healthier ways to have excitement and risk taking outside of addictions. And to help them slow down their decision making, because they do have impulse control issues, so that makes them very likely to not stay in treatment very long once they start struggling. So helping them through the impulse control can keep them in treatment longer. And they also have antisocial traits and behaviors, which is why they generally have a history of being in the criminal justice system. So. Next slide, please. So these are the 8 areas that the assessment's looking at. It's not all gambling related, which is important to tell your clients in the beginning, because I've had some just think about their behaviors while they're gambling, and some of the questions are like the sexual risk-taking questions are about sex and risks with that. So I just let clients know that it's looking at different areas to try to find the underlying causes of the problem gambling. In the very beginning, I had a few clients a little concerned about whether or not I was going to read through the questions, and so I've, because some of them are a little private, like the sexual risk taking. So I've just started telling clients I'm not going to look and read all their answers. I'm just going to take the score for the number. And you'll see that on the scoring sheet, because what we're really looking at is the sums of each of these areas. But the pre and post mood are a set of like 5 or 6 questions, or 4, I think it's 4 actually, that are exactly the same. So the difference is the first part is before gambling became a problem for them, how did they feel? And then the second part is after gambling became a problem. So this is trying to measure if gambling problems has caused a decline in mood. And it does say that on the assessment, which it's really important for the clients to read the bold print, which is directions prior to each of the question sections. So they understand what the questions, what the time frames are in the questions. Most of the time you're going to see either the pre and post mood are very similar, or the post mood will be worse. I have had some emotional vulnerable gamblers answer the questions in such a way where the post mood was slightly better, and that just tells you that the gambling is helping them cope, so to speak. But most often you're going to see the post be worse or about the same. So childhood abuse and neglect and trauma. Stress coping motivation is how often or how much are they using gambling to cope with stress. Impulsivity. Meaning motivation is how much does gambling create meaning in their life. So some of the questions are like, do you feel important after gambling or a big win, things like that. So that's what that's measuring, is how much is the winning and losing impacting, creating meaning in their life and impacting their self-esteem. Risk-taking, sexual risk-taking, and then antisocial traits and behaviors. So, and if you have any curiosity or you're not really sure what it's measuring, I suggest reading a blank copy in each of the sections of what questions are asking in each of those sections, because that's how I did it, because the publications don't really go over what they mean, but the questions make it pretty obvious what it's trying to measure. Okay, so this is the first page of the scoring sheet. So this is where, so most of the time, you're gonna have the client just fill out the 48 questions. If you have a client that has trouble with reading, or they have high mental health issues with filling out paperwork, you can do it in an interview format. I recommend, if they're able to follow along, to have them at least have a copy so they can mark the scale. Otherwise, you're going to have to try to help them pick a number by reminding them what is strongly disagreeing and what's strong agreeing. And the assessment only takes 5 to 10 minutes for the client to fill out, depending on how fast they read and how much thought they put into it. And then it's about 5 to 10 minutes to score it and talk to the client about the results. But this is the where you're going to pull their answers at, and it puts it in each of the 8 categories. So the first 3 are actually in numerical order because they're grouped together on the assessment. The rest of them are spread out and randomized in the assessment. So you have to kind of go through and find each of those. I found it to be quickest to just know what's on your first page of the assessment, and the second page stops at 36, and then the last page has 37 to 48, and then I just go through and find the numbers on the page and fill it in, but whatever you find easiest. But then you're gonna do some simple math and just add up each of those and put them in the sum boxes at the end of each of those categories. Now the sums are what you're gonna use on the second page of the scoring sheet, which is this. And this is where, this page is what's gonna be most helpful for treatment planning and tell you what pathway they're being assigned. So the top half of the page is each of those 8 categories again that it's measuring. So what you do is you put the sums that you got on the first page and you find what the, if it's a low, medium, or high score, and I just circle it. On the pre and post mood, if the pre is low and the post is high, I just circle both and write next to it pre and post, so I know that there was a difference. But that gives you a nice little snapshot of what you need to work on. So anything in the medium or high that's been scored as medium or high needs to be worked on in treatment. What you'd want to work on first can be collaborated between you and the client, but this gives you a nice little picture of what you might want to incorporate in your treatment planning. The bottom half is the actual scoring cutoffs. So you'll see like 1A, 2A, 3A. So that's the sums on that first page. They're also labeled 1A, 2A, 3A, that type of thing. So these are the cutoff scores. So if someone scores higher than 12 on the 1A, which is pre-mood, then you're going to put a 1 on the dash. And then if 18, the next one's 2A, and that's 18, that's post-mood. If it's a score higher than 18, put a 1. If they don't meet the cutoffs, you're just going to leave it blank. And then this gives you nice little directions on the right-hand side here. So I think it says if a person scores 3 or more, then then the conditions for pathway 2 haven't been met. But you want to fill out the whole thing, because on the very bottom here, it tells you if both conditions for pathway 2 and 3 have been met, then assign pathway 3. If neither have been met, then assign pathway 1. So you're gonna have to do this, fill out this whole thing. And then if on the pathway 3 section, the very last one says if 1A is greater than 12, and then subtract 1. And what that's doing is trying to make sure that we're not, because if their pre-mood was high and then gambling didn't really affect that, there was another condition beforehand. So so this is what you're going to show the client and talk and discuss with them after they're done. Now, I have the client do something else while I'm scoring this, because if you have them just sitting there, they're going to talk to you, and trying to do math and hold a conversation can be difficult. So I usually do the assessment is one of the first assessments. This assessment is usually the first screening I have them do, and instead of like 4 other screens, so they're doing other screens while I'm scoring this. Okay, so yeah, so then the next slide is just my references. These are both the papers that were published by Alex Valinsky and Leah Nauer. First one was done in 97 or 99, and the second one was done in 2016. The second one is where you'll find the actual pathways questionnaire and the scoring sheet. But they're both really good to read and to kind of get a better idea of what they were trying to do. So, okay. All right, thanks. That's my portion, so I think we're back to Jerry.
Yeah, all right, thanks. Thanks, Jessica, for the review on the gambling pathways questionnaire.
Yeah.
And we had a couple questioners in an automated view that would automatically do the scoring. And I think Nick was writing that they're thinking that they're going to have something coming out later this spring. So I mean, yeah. Is there anything more that you can let people know about that?
No, I just heard the same thing. I think that was part of their 2016 paper, was to work on that to make it easier for the clinician. But
Jessica, is there anything outside of the papers that you've listed here as your references that would be helpful for someone who's just new working with individuals struggling with their gambling, or are coming into treatment because of what's going on with their gambling? As far as, for those 3 different types of gambling pathways, as to getting a sense of how do I work best with them?
Now say that again. Sorry, I wasn't following very well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So are there other resources other than the papers that would assist how to best work with a pathway 1, pathway 2, or pathway 3 individual?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm going to be doing the conference at the Midwest Problem Gambling and Substance Abuse Conference on my research that I've done, but I haven't really looked into other research. No.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jessica.
Jerry, we'll turn it back over to you. Okay, a couple of things real quick. Lee, I think Nick, you can remind me, but I think Leah Nauer is going to be doing some presentations at the Midwest Conference again. But if not, we're in the process of working with a lot of researchers to put up protocols and what should happen and what types of therapy and et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to have a progress on that we're going to be doing at the Midwest Conference. And so I'm shamelessly plugging, go to the Midwest Conference, especially if you're new, so that you can learn from the people that are experts in this field about this pathways process. Jessica's going to be there. I think Leah's going to be there. There'll be several people that are there that can help you to begin the process of understanding this well past this process that we're going through. So, okay, so let's talk about working with family members and case management. One of the things that is imperative and important in this process is to not only do an assessment of whether or not they have a gambling issue, but to look at all the other areas of their life and to see what parts of their life are dysfunctional, what parts are not, what parts they want to work on, what parts they don't want to work on, and what makes their life more stable, because you need to build on that stability, what their strengths are and what their functioning is. I've lost you. Eric. Eric. Eric.
Yep, I'm sorry. My bad. There you go.
Okay. So one of the things we want to find out is what's working for them and what's not working for them. So, we ask questions like, well, what did you do for fun before you gambled? And people, like an 80-year-old person said to me, well, I used to competitively horse race. I'm going like, well, probably not going to work as an 80-year-old anymore. So what else are your resources and how else are you functioning? Because one of the things that we're going to have to do is figure out a way to substitute, like Jessica was talking about, substitute other behaviors for this gambling so that the gambling can become less important in their world. So because of the fact that you are probably ensconced in your areas, you probably know a lot of resources and referral processes that you can do that. Don't be scared to send them to places that can help them, including things like food banks and clothing and CPAs and lawyers and mental health therapists. If you're working on their gambling, and there's family members come in, my recommendation is to have a second counselor work on with the family member so that they can both have advocates. Now, if you can't do that, you can't do that. But don't be fearful of sending them to places that can help them, both legally, financially, etc. If you're not good at the financial piece, get the initial work done by someone who is. So, next. This is, and they're going to do a whole thing on this process, so I'm going to go over it really quickly. But one of the things I would like you to do before you start working with gamblers is find your credit report. Look at your credit report so that you know what a credit report looks like. Now, start with Credit Karma. That's free. But you can also get free your credit report twice a year, free. And you can look at all your credit reports. And on the credit report, you can see how many credit cards you have, how much debt you have, what percentage of debt you have. And then that's a place to start to see where the money's going and what's going on with the credit. And if you're fearful of dealing with your own credit and with your own budget, my other recommendation is to build your own budget and see how you're spending your money so that you're comfortable dealing with other people's money. Because one of the things that we struggle with as counselors is money is almost a taboo subject to talk about, other than, well, how will you be making your copay? So the last part of that is that you cannot make a recovery budget if the family's not involved. This is a great way to get the family involved in the treatment and recovery of gambling, and also with substance abuse, by the way, is to build a budget and have everyone involved in working through that recovery budget. So, and the rest of that's going to have to be in another presentation. So move on. We will talk about gambling as a last resort, but what the interesting part about this is that if there's a gambling establishment in the county, there are 18% higher bankruptcy rates, which means there are people who are getting in trouble with gambling and they are bankrupting out. And those are the people that are taking what we call the ultimate bailout. And we use bankruptcy as a last resort, which means we don't necessarily eliminate it, but we use it as a last resort. I had a client who was so far in, and at 66 years old, had used up all of her retirement and all of her savings and everything like that, and was so far in debt that she had to go to a scheduled bankruptcy. Now, there's a couple of types of bankruptcy. Learn the couple of types of bankruptcy and begin the process of learning who the bankruptcy lawyers are in your area, and then begin to teach them about what gambling is, so that they can help people, if rather than bankrupt, go to you, or bankrupt not necessarily a liquidation, but a scheduled bankruptcy. So move on. Medications. One of the things that we want to talk about is, are there medications that work? And the answer to that is, yeah, sort of. Naltrexone has been used. It's been used both in substance abuse and in gambling, and it can be effective. You're going to have to check with your psychiatrist to see if naltrexone is warranted with this population. But if you augment with an SSRI, sometimes you have some relief in gambling symptoms. Next. Couple of subtypes that you want to look at, and naltrexone works with the first subtype, which are driven by urge to gamble, and the second type, which is the more difficult type. They use a drug that's generally used for Parkinson's. Again, we have a lot of work that we can do on this, and you can learn a lot about this, but you're going to have to do some research on this as to whether or not it works with your particular client. And if you have any questions, you can email me, and I'll work through some of that with you. So next slide.
Yeah, Jerry, and I'm going to just add in too there. I mean, if you've got, an AARNP or a psychiatrist
yes,
on staff, that's also a place where you can do some consultation to have those conversations about what could be best for the patient.
And if I'm right, isn't the state grant help to pay for some of that psychiatric?
Yeah, there is within the IPN the assistance for medications.
And there's your answer. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Eric. Next. This are the medications and the amounts, et cetera, and the outcomes, et cetera. And I give those to you so that you can see that sometimes, and here's the daily dose, and sometimes they're effective and sometimes they're less effective. There's been a lot of research on this, and not a lot of medications are overly effective with gamblers, although some are, and it's all individual based. And so, we can't say that everybody likes naltrexone, and because some people don't do well on naltrexone. So that's, I give that to you for you to do more research on. Next. And here's all the research stuff. And this is my favorite. I'm not a doctor. I'm not, but I was sitting in a conference where Dr. John Grant was doing some research on acetylcysteine, N-acetylcysteine. And N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, is a supplement. And so what I recommend to most of my clients who are not pregnant or have any heart conditions, and even a heart condition, I got the pharmacist said it was okay for a gambler that had a heart condition. I give this, or don't give this. I recommend that the clients buy this, and it's about $7 to $10 for a 30-day process, 30 days of this NAC. You can get it at the Hy-Vees and at the health food stores. I recommend that they take NAC because this study and it was 1,100 milligrams, but at the health food stores you can only get them in 1,200. It doesn't matter. The next 100 milligrams doesn't make any difference, but the least amount of dosage is 1,100. And it talks about the fact that it reduces cravings for gamblers in over 60 up to 80% of people that have gambling issues, that are craving gambling, that are succumbing to the urges to gamble. So one of the things I do right away is work to, give them the research, and there's been a follow-up research. Dr. Grant did a follow-up research recently, and the research says that this is a good supplement to help people to reduce their gambling urges. And one of the things we want to do is to reduce the urges so that they can listen and hear what we have to say. Because if they're triggered to gamble and they're constantly thinking about gambling, they cannot hear what recovery looks like and sounds like. So I recommend that you do the research on this. There's some research on doing this with smoking and with cocaines and methamphetamines, and there are milligrams that people are giving on this NAC that are helping those drug clients to find help in reducing their cravings too. I can't swear to that because I don't do substance abuse counseling, but I can tell you that it does work with gamblers. And I put most of my people onto this right away for at least three months, if not 6 months. I had one client who was on there for 3 months. She decided to go off it, and within 30 days, she was back gambling again because she wasn't quite. I mean, her recovery hadn't gotten far enough so that she still went and succumbed to the cravings. So next.
Yeah, and Jerry, I'm just going to jump in real quick just so that people are clear that this is just a recommendation. So this
Right.
is something you need to talk and discuss with the patients. Certainly for those that you have medical staff on board, certainly this would be a conversation that they would want to have with their primary care physician as well.
Yes, I would always recommend that they go to talk to their pharmacist and say, okay, I'm on these medications. Will this interact at all? And I see that Vicky's asking why not heart issues. It just hasn't been researched with people with heart issues. Okay, so if they didn't do research with pregnant women or with heart issues or etc., then they rather than be silent on it, they just say hasn't been tested with. So, but I can, it's for, basically it's a liver pill, but that was the original intent of it. But it's been researched by addictions researchers now, and it has some validity.
Yep. All right, thank you. And Nick provided an additional comment there too as well. So thanks, Nick, for providing those additional comments there. So Jerry, we're gonna I'm gonna stop. We're getting close to the hour here.
Okay.
So wanted to again thank Jerry and Jessica. A couple of slides here. I don't remember, Jerry, if we've got some that you're talking after this or not, but we'll find out swiftly. But we did a problem gambling voluntary self-exclusion training the end of December. But again, for those of you who may not have been on that and are just new to the game, as far as self-exclusion, that was taken over by the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission as of January 1. Some will say, well, what is voluntary self-exclusion? And it literally means that whether they are via the Iowa Lottery, which is through the Iowa Lottery, or through casinos. And even for the tribal casinos, they all have some sort of self-exclusion program and process. What we're speaking here specifically is the one for the 19 licensed casinos in the state of Iowa. If I'd been thinking better, I would have put the Iowa Lottery piece on here, but you can go to the Iowa Lottery website to get their voluntary self-exclusion information. If I remember, I'll add that to the slides when we put the slide deck out on the website. But anyway, in the Iowa code, it does that all casinos are required to have this voluntary self-exclusion where they can either ban themselves for 5 years or for their lifetime. The 5-year option just came on board about 18 months ago. And again, you can go to the website. I put a link here in the slides for the training that was done back in October, as well as the slides that are available. Also, part of the voluntary self-exclusion is that there are anyone who requests information on voluntary self-exclusion must receive information on the Iowa Gambling Treatment Program. So there's a link for that actual brochure there. Those brochures can also be ordered from the department. You can go to the IPN at idph.iowa.gov. There's also an order form that's on the IGTV website that you can download and order those for. But I encourage you to take a look at their frequently asked questions page. You can actually download the form and walk through it. Most of it's fillable PDF, and again, you can go back and watch the training from back in December. Michael Poundstone did a great job walking through that. And as far as an important part of the gambling toolkit is, it is one of these, this tool that does everybody need voluntary self-exclusion? No, but we often find people when they get to the point of voluntary self-exclusion, they're thinking it's the end-all, cure-all, when in fact it's just another part of the step in the process, because they then may switch to other type of gambling activities and that, or go and start doing the Iowa Lottery versus going to, or they're going to a tribal casino rather than going to the casino. Jerry, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that real quickly.
Yeah, I generally, if a person wants to self-exclude, I generally say, okay, let's get this done. I bring it up every time as an option, but I also bring it up later on down the road when when their thinking has become clearer, so that they can use it as a tool. I generally don't say, you have to do this in order to be involved in treatment, because I don't think that's an effective tool. Because, well, first of all, generally people that are gambling relapse on lottery rather than going back to the casino. And second of all, you tell somebody they can't do something and immediately they're finding a way to do it. That's just the population that we're working with. So I use it as a tool, and I don't use it as a requirement. It's never been a requirement for me, simply because it's so hard for the security to check them anyway. And this is a self-imposed process, and I want them to understand what it really truly means to self-impose this on themselves, to put this barrier up for themselves.
Yeah. And what Jerry's referencing, and I think for those of you who have known me for a while, we do share the information of the forfeited funds. That's one of the, if they voluntarily self-exclude and they go back on the casino property, or now it's actually the casino floor, and they make their way onto the floor unbeknownst to the security staff there, and they win more than $600, I think it's $1,200. Those winnings actually get forfeited to the state, and for fiscal year 18, it was about $350,000 that was forfeited. So, so there are pluses and minuses to the use of voluntary self-exclusion, but it is a voluntary, it's self-imposed, and the casinos do the best that they can on their end to put it in place. And in fact, they get fined if someone is found self-excluded on there. So they not only, the winnings get forfeited, but there's generally also a fine that gets levied on the casinos when that happens. Jerry, I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk to real quick. I know we are right at the end of our time here.
Just click through it, and then this is one of my favorite quotes.
And it's even waving, Jerry. I didn't see that.
Some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go. You pick on which. So, but I do want to thank especially the new people that are getting involved in this process. I applaud you for doing that. I would like, you can email me or call me anytime. I'd be glad to help you. This is a small group of people and we're all in this together. So please, please, please don't think that you're alone. And the first time a gambler walks in the door, you don't have to be alone on this. You can, there's a whole bunch of people that'll help. So.
All right. And again, thanks both to Jerry and to Jessica for being on there. So we really don't have time for additional questions today, but certainly you can take advantage of the chat and send those in over the last couple of minutes. I actually need to run to a committee hearing on one of the sports wagering bills. So I've got the poll open. If you'd like CEUs, please click on that. If you are at a computer and you're sharing this session and you're registered under, you're viewing, but someone else had registered to be in here, make sure you also send your email, your organization, and your name via the chat so that I can have record and make sure that you get the CEUs. As I've mentioned before, we will get those certificates out. My promise is to have them to you within 30 days from today for today's training, and just give you the contact information is here. And I said I'll do some updates to the slides, put that Iowa lottery information in there about their self-exclusion. We've got Jerry's and Jessica's contact information. Please feel free to reach out to them regarding the information from today. And again, extend a great thanks to both Jessica and Jerry for their work. Our next webinar will be next Wednesday, I believe, at noon. And look forward to seeing many of you there again, as we'll get to hear from Nick Foss and more on assessing and intervening with someone who's struggling with their gambling. So with that, I'll bid adieu to everyone. I'll leave the poll open here for about another minute or so. And stay warm, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.